Hey YouTube. So in this video today, I want to have a chat with you guys about running costs for your business, but from the perspective of a customer. Now, let's just talk about that. So I genuinely think that there's people out there that have got no clue on what it takes to run a business, whether it's a gardening business or any other such business, you know, to an extent that they might go to a supermarket and understand that the supermarket's got to put a bit extra on to cover their costs. But I think for tradespeople, well, you're swapping time for money, and well, why can't you just give up an hour? You know, I genuinely do, and I can see a way that people do get like that, in the sense that, you know, you imagine somebody that's lived not a sheltered life, but somebody that's, you know, they've had a job, you know, for all their life, or, you know, they've always been in a stable income, they've always been capable of doing things themselves, and it's only up until later on in life that they're having to get people to do it. So that's one category of people. I think as well there's another category of people that basically they do know, and this is why I put it on my red flags list. Quite often when people say to me, I know exactly what it takes to run a business, my brother's a business owner, my partner's self-employed, well, quite often I find they're the worst ones, because they know fully well that we've got costs, but because it interferes with their life, they don't want to hear it. You know, they think if they can get it cheaper, they'll choose to avoid that. And I think that is, again, that's probably the worst one, really. And then actually I think the majority of people, they do know, and the majority of people that you'll encounter are good people. You know, they understand that you've got to make a living, they understand that you've got to put money on it, just the same that I understand that Morrison's and Tesco's and M&S and all them, they've got to put a markup, or any other shop has got to put a markup. Don't get me wrong, if you said to me, I'll tell you what, Sam, we'll do it at cost for, I'll be over the moon. You know, I'd stock up. But alas, you know, we live in a world where we've got to put the costs on. So, you know, all this sort of comes from those conversations that you have with customers where, oh, that's a lot, why is it that much? You know, and for, again, the majority of people don't seem to question it, it's always the minorities. And I've found that people like that, they can't wrap their head around the fact that, say, a mower would cost £1,500. You know, so I've just bought a commercial grade mower, but other people that use, you know, the big mowers or specialised kit, or not even specialised, but, you know, they've got like the cordless still stuff, or, you know, they've bought the Ego stuff. So, you know, instead of like the customer having a plug-in trimmer for like 40 quid from Argos, someone's chose to spend £4, and they can't understand it at all. And I've told, you know, like I said, it's the minority, so it's those two first groups. And I find in the past, I found myself almost basically justifying my prices to people, as in saying to them, well, you know, I have to put this on because, you know, I've got running costs, or, you know, I've just invested in a new mower. You know, so I have it quite often when it's raining or it's wet. People sometimes, not so much now, but in the past, they've used that as an excuse to miss a visit. Now, don't get me wrong, if it's absolutely sheeting down, I'm not going to cut your grass. If it is that the garden's underwater, again, I'm not going to mow your lawn. Well, what's the point? I'm going to make a mess of it. But I'll use my professional input to work out whether it's suitable for me. So, like I said, I find it's, you know, and you get into that conversation of, oh, you know, and you say to them, well, look, don't worry, the finish will be just as good. I've invested in equipment, or I've just bought a new mower, or, you know, I've invested in a mower that's capable of it. You know, I have it quite, one of the most commonly asked questions I get from the Joe Blogs public is, can you cut grass when it's wet? And I'll say, yeah, of course you can. It says, you know, and I always explain there's a difference between, you know, a homeowner mower and a professional grade mower, in the sense that the professional grade mower will cut, bag and collect and not leave a bit of it behind. They'll do, you know, and it doesn't matter whether it's wet or dry. But a homeowner mower will clog up pretty quick, or it won't pick all of it up, you know, and that's the difference. And what the premium is, the price difference, because again, people have said, oh, well, how much is that? And to be fair, I always send them down the Stell route, you know, get the cheap one with a plastic box, you'll be all right. But, you know, even then, it's 400 quid compared to 100 quid, you know, and they can't wrap their head around it at all. Like I say, to them, it's, you know, and I think as well, you've got to remember that people that have been working in jobs, you know, they've never had to pay a bean towards their job. Yes, they might have to buy a new pair of work boots every so often, but if they've had uniform provided, they haven't. You know, they won't think, oh, well, it's putting wear and tear on my car, because they assume that's part and parcel of it. But I think if people had to, you know, get specialist insurance for the car, they had to get an additional vehicle to do their business, you know, to get to their job. They had to buy the uniform, and the boss said, oh, well, you know, right, you're gonna have to rent your desk, you're gonna have to rent your till, you know what I mean? Like a couple of broad assertions there, but you get what I mean. And so with all that and all that futility, how do you counter these percentages, you know, these 1%, you know, 10%, whatever, depending on the season? You know, these people, like I said at the start, that they know what it takes, but we don't want to pay it, or, you know, vice versa. How do you sort of try and get them people back on side or justify it? Well, unfortunately, again, in my experience, there's no telling them. They, like I said, you imagine if you've, you know, your husband's always cut the grass, and suddenly they've got to get somebody, you know, they just don't understand it. And what they'll do is they'll just shop around until they find somebody within their budget. So they might have a lawn that's overgrown and the borders are messy, and then they'll get somebody in, you know, so they'll go for the low-hanging fruit first. They'll look on, you know, the business pages, or they'll look in the newspapers, and then they'll get a professional out, and a professional come and quote them a professional rate for a professional service, and to them it's abhorrent, you know, I'm not paying that. And then they'll look for other people, and this is when you get like like this point in the season. So you get round about, you know, halfway through May, June time, you start getting these phone calls where people are frantic almost, and they're saying, oh, we can't get anybody, we've been let down, you know, we just can't. And what it is they literally, at the start of the season, because they know the garden looks messy, they'll ring people up, and then they'll get the price that they don't like, so they'll look for somebody else. And then even the cheap rates, you know, I genuinely think there's people who'll do any job for any price, but even then, people are picky. You know, I've spoken to these job and knocker gardens, and even they say there's jobs that they won't touch, you know. And I think, as you know, us, we like the low-hanging fruit. You know, if we had a choice between mowing a lawn, or, you know, hands and knees border weeding, or, you know, fetching out ivy and a mess of other things, well, you know what people will pick, really, don't you? So like I said, it is one of them where it's, fortunately, it's very frustrating. I find you can't educate people like that, you can't tell people like that. You've pretty much got to just, for me now, and I always do it in a fashion where I'm not rude, I'm not ignorant, but basically just explain to people that, you know, I'm not the gardener for you, and I'll leave it as that. You know, because I've done it in the past where I've sat there and I've said to them, oh, Luke, I've just bought a new mower, it's cost me, you know, X amount, and I bought myself a new cordless kit, so I can come and I can work, I'm not disturbing you, and the mower will pick up anything in any condition. Unfortunately, it doesn't really mean much to them, unfortunately. So like I said, it's something that you've got to sort of deal with yourself, and however you do it, for me, I find already you've wasted your time, you know, looking around, talking to them, giving the price. You don't want to hear it. So for me, I don't want to sit there and justify my prices. Even when they put you on the spot, I've had it in the past where people, they've said to me, are you trying it on? You know, is it because I'm an OAP you think you can charge me this ridiculous price? And I always say to them, well, no, everybody gets the same price. And you find yourself justifying yourself, and if anything, it makes me feel worse afterwards than if I'd have just said, you know, right, we're not a match together, we're not the right gardener for you, I'll be on my way. that's how I tend to do it now. So have a good day, guys, and let me know, do you think the average person, I think the average person does, if I'm being honest with you. I think the average Joe Bloggs public, they do, and I think even further than that, the average, or I think people do know. Like I said, I think there's a small subset of people that don't. So where, you know, they could have, you know, retired, well, they could have been a housewife to take care of the children. The husband's brought all the money in, you know, they've managed the household, they've managed children. There's a way they've sort of lost touch with certain things, you know, especially coming from the background that the husband's always mowed the lawn. He's gone now, and now they've got to pay somebody. You can see it's a shock to people. God, my husband did it for free for 50 years. So let me know, guys. Have a good day. Usual, keep on gardening.